Hey folks, before we start this week's episode, we just want to give you a gentle warning. We're about to discuss some fairly charged and unpleasant topics, including some deplorable ideas and music. So please be aware in advance that this show featured some isolated samples, and those are in there because we're discussing a difficult topic, and we trust our audience to exercise their own discretion. Hopefully you find this to be both an informative and cautionary journey. Enjoy.
It gets funnier every time and people aren't going to know why, you know?
When you've done multiple takes that all involve me starting with an Ace of Base riff.
It's only ever one take, Chris. That's only ever one take.
Yeah, sorry, this was the first take.
Yeah.
I am Mark Fraser. This is the Unsung Podcast. I am joined by
Vicky.
I'm joined by
Christopher.
And I'm joined by
Four Swedish
Swedish maestros.
4 angels.
4 angels, 3 angels and the potential devil. And this week we're doing, what are we doing?
This week's a Bobby Dazzler. This week we're doing something that's a bit more of a documentary piece. And we'll tell people in a minute. I think you've got some admin to deal with first.
Yeah, I was using you to tee them up. I think you've just hyped it though.
Yeah, you've created a bit of tension and suspense. Everybody's on the edge of their seat now.
So this week is we're about to ship out our records for May. So if you're not part of our record club yet, you can still get involved. If you go to patreon.com/unsungpod, you can join one of our 3 lovely subscription models. The first one is just basically you're buying as a pint. It's £4 a month or whatever the equivalent is in your local currency. You can get access to bonus episodes and you can join our fun Facebook group. But if you want to just splash a little more cash, you can join our record club. First tier is digital, so we send you a digital download of our choice every month.
Yeah, curated download based on taste, and there's a bit of back and forth with us establishing what you're going to like. You can choose your host, but yeah, we'll send you something new and innovative, something that you probably won't be able to find otherwise. You know, we're trying to source some interesting records and make sure money goes to bands and labels that can put it to good use directly to them as well.
Yep. And if you're feeling really flush, then for £40 a month, or depending on where you are in the world, it's a little bit more just for shipping. Do you know why we're charging shipping, Chris?
Ships?
Yes, exactly. Oh my god, it's so expensive. Please give us some money. No, we'll send you a vinyl, actual fucking physical record, which Chris and I have littered in boxes all over our houses.
You're sitting in one right now.
I am, yeah. So we'll send you vinyl of pretty much exactly what Chris said about digital, but it's a curated vinyl
and a digital album.
And a digital album, which is different from the vinyl. Yeah, it's just a fucking party, man. Get involved.
So the reason that you want to fund this podcast is because, other than us just bitching about crap indie albums, we can sometimes take a bit of time and do something a little bit different and a little bit special. And that's what we've done this episode, and probably next episode. Let's be honest. There's some thinking behind this episode, okay? Because I've brought the subject of Ace of Base, the Swedish pop quartet from the early to mid-90s, up on the show a number of times, and probably in quite disparaging terms, because I was made aware around about, I think it's about 2014, of allegations that Ace of Base were neo-Nazis or far-right affiliated, or some sort of Trojan horse attempt to sneak Nazi ideology into the popular subconscious. And I became a little bit concerned that I might be doing that with a bit more certainty and righteous indignation than I was maybe entitled to. and I began to worry a wee bit. What do I actually know? Am I talking a load of shite? Am I out of line? Am I just spreading this because it's a cool hot take? Because, you know, everybody loves a hot take. Everybody loves to have that special knowledge that they can unleash in someone else. Vicky, I know we've spoken about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you knew about this rumour.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. I think from my point of view, though, I've always just been like, oh, Ace of Base, weren't they like Nazis when they were younger? And didn't really know what was involved, anything. I just assumed that the entire outfit was involved in some Nazi behaviour before they became famous.
Yeah. First, that's the thing. It's not news. I think plenty of fans of the music, and I suppose just plenty of members of the public in general, have no idea. But on the flip of that, if you go and Google Ace of Base Nazi, good luck getting to the end of those results.
Mm-hmm.
There's reams of this stuff. Within those results, you'll find that the main articles that scooped it, this particular episode relies heavily on a Vice article, an infamous Vice article from April 2013. You also find a lot of examples of Ulf's responses, Ulf being the member in particular that was at the heart of it. Some of those articles are pretty measured, some of them are stupid. But it is ultimately not a trivial thing, and the issue merits discussion at least. So yeah, whilst I acknowledge that some people maybe aren't aware of it, a lot of people are, and I just felt we had a kind of obligation to maybe look at it properly when an opportunity came up, in case we're guilty of just being those people that are repeating something without actually checking it out first, and I don't want to be that. There's some sort of key recent coverage. You know, this actually all kicked off in the early 90s, but the Vice article in 2013 by a guy called Benjamin Shapiro, and no, it's not the same Ben Shapiro that you're probably thinking of. That was titled Ace of Base's Secret Nazi Past, and also there was a follow-up in 2015 in Cracked titled How a Pop Band Tricked 9 Million Americans into Being Nazis by Adam Todd Brown. And that title alone tells you that article goes a fair bit further in its speculation on what was actually going on.
Classic Cracked clickbait headline.
Is that what they're known for, is it?
Yeah.
And the fact the guy's called Todd Brown is an indication that it's a piece of shit as well.
So there's various takes when you go through those results, and when you just go through people's opinions in general, there's various takes that emerge. It was one big misunderstanding and or a fuss about nothing. That's kind of rare in my experience. It was totally true, and they're actually covert fascists bent on corrupting teenage minds. That's rare, but probably less rare, if I'm being honest. It was true, and they, especially Ulf, regret it. That's the majority.
Yeah.
And then there's a slightly more nuanced one, which is there a chance this band was initially an attempt at far-right pop, which was then abandoned when they unexpectedly attained success, maybe due to the subtlety of the messaging, meaning that most people didn't actually click on to what the agenda was. I mean, you guys at least are aware of this rumour. It's not all that esoteric, even if it's not completely mainstream. But the fact that it was reported, I mean, some of the publications that ran with it, all the major newspapers have something on it, you know.
But they all seem to, there's not a huge amount of like primary sources on it. They're all quoting the same articles and all of that. It's the same.
That's very true. So, I mean, to that end, so the opportunity finally did sort of present itself here, in as much as I thought we'll talk about this and we'll really contextualise it. So we're going to go on a few deviations in the course of these shows, where we take in things like Swedish pop. Why is it so big? Why is it this giant cultural export? And we're also going to talk about Nazi punk a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit about Swedish politics, and these are interesting issues in the orbit of this, and it'll give us an opportunity to look at them via the lens of this one particular controversy, and hopefully that'll make it a bit less dry and all-round educational. Okay, but I guess we should start with the basics, and here's what we know for sure. On the 27th of March 1993, Expressen, one of the biggest papers in Sweden at the time, reported that Ulf Ekberg, who was part of Ace of Base, had once been a member of a band called Commit Suicide. Commit Suicide was active in Gothenburg from 1983 to 1986, when Ulf was between the ages of 13 and 16. In 1998, songs that were purported to have been recorded by Commit Suicide, they weren't actually recorded by Commit Suicide, but we'll come back to that later, with explicit racist lyrics, were released on the unauthorised mini-album Uffe Was a Nazi. Uffe being Ulf's nickname, I believe. We also know Ulf Ekberg was definitely, by his own admission, at one point in a neo-Nazi band. How long that lasted is maybe up for debate, or how long his opinions and allegiances there lasted is maybe up for debate, and understandably he plays that down. We're going to have a look and see if his pleading tracks with reality. He has disputed some aspects of his musical past, but he's never, to my knowledge, questioned the authenticities of photos of him that emerged in SS shirts, like Iron Eagle shirts and Nazi shirts, Sikh Island. And those photos are pretty widespread if you look them up. Later, in 2013, as I mentioned, other media outlets, in particular Vice and Cracked in 2015, brought the story back into the mainstream, into a new audience, including, really, to me, I'd missed it first time around, and this was when I became aware of it, and very titillated by it, given my fondness for crypto-fascism, or reading about it, not for the actual practice. I should say, in the interest of some sort of appearance of professionalism, we did actually attempt to contact Ace of Base and their management about this, given that we're, potentially slandering, defaming the band and the individuals. We thought it's appropriate to reach out. Despite years of trying to bury this story and probably them all being sick to the back teeth of questions on it, I did say in that contact that we were attempting to be significantly more fair-minded than other outlets had been, and perhaps we could even help, depending on what conclusions we arrived at, clear some of it up. We didn't get a reply from them, and I don't necessarily expect one, given how fed up they must be about talking about it, and to be honest, nor do I necessarily blame them if that is the case. But in the interest of providing as much right to reply as possible, I have pulled together a number of responses and quotes by Ulf on the matter. I've seen it reported that in 1997 documentary Our Story, Ekberg said, "I told everyone I really regret what I've done. I took the experience from it, I learned from it, but that life is not me, it's somebody else." Now, I couldn't actually find that quote verbatim, and I could only find a documentary called This Story, not Our Story, from the same year, but that was broadcast on Swedish television. I'm going to assume that's some kind of translational thing that, the name has been written differently. In that show, he also says that he often, quote, figurated in situations where people had swastikas, which is the most roundabout way of saying that, oh yeah, I was in a neo-Nazi punk band. Due to being the youngest in a gang and feeling that he had to prove himself, apparently. He says he, quote, didn't care about the politics and was never against democracy or Jews. And he said, suddenly I was 18 and I started to realise this was not the life I want. In 2013, after the Vice article had reignited this whole controversy, he spoke to E! Online. During the early 1990s, I did dozens of interviews all around the world about people I sometimes found myself surrounded by in the 1980s. That is, found myself surrounded by. It's a bit of a euphemism, right?
Yeah, and it's quite like a passive sentence, isn't it? And
how profoundly regretful I am now about associating with such individuals. The teenage mistakes I did make in terms of my chosen ideas at the time were unfortunate, and if I were to live through those days again, I would have done things very differently. I'm truly deeply sorry for any hurt and disappointment this has caused for our fans, and I want to be very clear that Ace of Base never shared any of these opinions and strongly oppose all extremist opinions on both the right and left wing. I do think it's interesting that he mentions the right and the left wing, since this is clearly an allegation of being right wing. I would probably say that as well, but I do think it takes a little bit of political conditioning to want to specify that you're against left wing opinions as well. Do you know what I mean? It's all very well saying.
He does say extreme though.
Yeah, he does.
Extreme's doing a bit of heavy lifting there, but it is kind of important.
I'm not disagreeing with his statement. I just think it's interesting that he went to the lengths to specify that he was also against extreme left-wing opinions. Just saying, I think that's an interesting touch.
Well, Sweden's kind of is termed to be quite a left-wing country anyway, compared to the European order, as it were.
Sort of centre-left. He continues, I have always been deeply regretful of that period in my life as I strive to bring happiness to people, and during that period I did not live up to that standard. I have not been involved in violence or political activism in the past 25 years. I'd highlight that, or political activism in the past 25 years. We'll come to that later. However, I find some of my thoughts from those days nauseating to myself today. My past is my own, and only I can own up to it. On the whole, I actually think what he says is pretty clear. It's saying, I did this, I was into this. It's saying things like, I found some of my thoughts nauseating. fair play to the guy, as he says, and only I can own up to it. So that is the context of the controversy we're getting at here, okay? It's not up for debate. He's admitted it. He was in that band. What we're going to be debating is the extent to which that infiltrated other aspects of his career. But we should look into the wider story of the band for a bit more context, okay? Ace of Base is fundamentally what happens when you look at ABBA and think to yourself, they're Aryan, but they're not quite Aryan enough in on a number of levels. The band was made up of Lynn Berggren, double G, Jenny Berggren, Jonas Berggren, a trio of siblings, and then Ulf Ekberg, the black sheep of the family. In many ways, the black shirt of the family.
Buddha.
Yeah, they have nicknames as well. So Jonas was Joker and Ulf was Buddha. He's not in the slightest bit fat, or it doesn't really seem that jolly, or
Buddha wasn't jolly, mate.
Is he not?
No, he was chill as fuck.
Chill.
I suppose.
You get the laughing Buddhas though, don't you?
I mean,
Aye.
chill people can laugh. I've heard that happen before.
Anyway, Ace of Base adopted a very well established recipe for pop success: 2 men, 2 women. I think it seems pretty obvious that, possibly in the same ways that like the Beatles or Oasis's massive success here spawned explosions of bands that copied that style, ABBA's spawned a huge pop bias in Sweden, right? Ironically, the band were actually rejected by Polar Music, which was ABBA's label. It's also, by the way, the label that the Helicopters were on for a while. But it's worth also noting as well, before we dive in deeper, that Ace of Base did write the vast majority of their early music, and that's kind of one of those weird phenomena from the 90s. One of those things that slowly got surgically sort of excised from pop bands was like, oh no, you're not going to write your own stuff. There's too much risk involved in that.
And maybe that's because they heard Ace of Base's songs.
Well, yeah, but the thing is, I mean, okay, they actually did have assistance from producers. And in fact, I think a young Max Martin gave them his first ever co-produced hit on their second record. But what they did do themselves was far more than most, especially most contemporary pop bands have managed. They had some huge selling albums, especially Happy Nation, the record that we're going to focus on, and it was mainly their work. Yeah. Even if it ages like milk.
No, for all intents and purposes, they were a band.
Yeah, yeah, and they wrote and they had great success doing it. And so I can deride a lot of Ace of Base's music, and I will. And you guys may join me in that, but they did do it themselves, and kudos for that, you know. But maybe we should also place them in the context of Swedish pop. What is Swedish pop? Why is its influence and reputation so vast? And, you know, I
couldn't believe it, actually, just how much music comes to Sweden that I didn't even realise was Swedish.
It's mental.
It's amazing.
Yeah, so Sweden has a population of 10.3 million, but has an insane level of representation in not only classic pop, you know, the biggest selling acts are ABBA and Roxette, with Ace of Base third in that list. Loads besides that as well, but also in songwriting and pop songwriting. I mean, there was a time in the charts when about half of the charts had been written by writers.
Marathon is a huge thing, right?
Yeah. I would actually say, by the way, I think maybe only Scotland has as disproportionate a musical legacy for population as Sweden. And if you disagree, you can fucking come at me. But Scotland does have a grossly disproportionate amount of famous and quality music that's come out of it.
It's not just music, it's like in the arts in general. Scotland punches well above its weight.
Yeah.
And that's not to mention all the TV shows and the books and the fact that we fucking film Outlander here and all that, and all the co-productions and stuff. So yeah, like
also like comics. I mean, for Holly, we know Kick-Ass and The Watchmen and Judge Dredd. They're all Scottish writers and artists. Anyway, the culture in Sweden, as you mentioned earlier, Mark, is generally quite liberal, social democratic, I think it's described as, with a fairly positive attitude towards progressive causes like LGBTQ plus rights, immigration, historically at least, although they've had their moments with that, especially around about the time of the Syrian crisis. The people are often tall and gorgeous, which does sometimes see them cast as Aryan poster children, not least because of their Viking and Germanic heritage.
I'm going to draw on some deep knowledge here, so I might get this completely wrong, but I'm fairly sure they effectively had a eugenics program up until from the end of the World War II until the 50s.
There you go, Sweden.
So I'm
Mark's calling you
out. Which is why when I say eugenics, is mostly about trying to get rid of people with disabilities from the society. It's the post-World War I up until the 50s period.
Fact, Sweden has won Eurovision 6 times, only one behind Ireland, which is the number 1 Eurovision country. Swedish pop, okay, so there are key circumstances around the prevalence of Swedish pop. Sweden is consistently in the top 10 of non-native speaking English countries based on the survey work of the EF English Proficiency Index. That's like education first. Sweden is currently 8th in the world, and City of Stockholm is 5th in the world. A debate actually exists as to whether English should even be considered a foreign language in Sweden, or rather reclassified as either a second language or what they call a transcultural language due to its widespread use in education, the media and beyond.
Well, I don't know about Sweden, but I can definitely speak for Denmark in saying that they do get taught it from pretty much like kindergarten onwards, like English, and it's American English specifically to identify with American culture. Don't get taught British English. Funnily enough, it's probably not the same as Sweden, but up until like the 80s, the secondary language in Denmark was German. So like people of older generations speak more German than they do English, because Germany's right there.
But it's interesting though that they speak German, more so than English, and the implications that has for pop culture. Okay, so
I could go on for ages about how it affected Denmark pop culture, but continue.
The Swedish government, a bit like the French government actually, who only placed at number 31 on that index that we spoke about earlier, actually took steps to strengthen the status of Swedish in Sweden. The influx of US Marines into Europe in the 1940s during World War II changed a lot of demographics as countries adapted and absorbed those influences. Sweden was also one of a few countries to be further cross-pollinated by what they call German Schlager pop from 1950s onwards. That music kind of blended with those American flavours in post-war Sweden and created a kind of highly marketable trend in really tuneful westernised anglophone pop writing. Schlager was very, very accessible and easy in the ears.
Einmal sehen wir uns wieder und vielleicht schon übers Jahr. Der Winter geht, alles geht vorbei, Dezember oder Mai, ja, alles geht vorbei. Der Sommer geht, der Winter
and obviously you had rock and roll and pop music coming with the American influences, so it was quite palatable to other markets. In the 1960s, a few Swedish acts, including Mickey Markmen and the Baby Grandmothers, which I've read that so many times now doing these notes, and I always laugh. Attained such popularity that they ended up spending months touring the USA alongside bands like Sly and the Family Stone and Grand Funk Railroad, and they then took those influences and stuff back to Sweden, where they were quite prominent. So the Swedish proficiency in English played a huge part in the pop explosion in the 1970s as artists sang in English, which immediately opened them up to the UK, American and Australian markets, especially, amongst many others like Canada and stuff, that would otherwise have ignored Swedish-speaking bands. Do you know what I mean? That's a big thing in terms of the marketability. That border-crossing trend continues today across most genres in Sweden still. You know, everything from metal and punk. You know, you hear Swedish punk bands and think they're American bands. The Beatles also happened in a really big way in Sweden. I know they happen in a big way everywhere, but especially so in Sweden, given the widespread nature of English there. That led to a flurry of bands in that vein, including the Hep Stars, featuring Mr. Benny Andersson, who was spoken about from ABBA in our ABBA mixtape. Go back and listen to that.
Won't you please be my baby, my one and only baby, my darling, be my baby now.
Also, dance band music, or just abbreviated dance band, emerged as a distinctive style in the 70s in Sweden, with big melodies, big commercial hooks, and Swedish household names such as Flamingo Kvintetten. Visex and Torleifs, so I'm sure we're all really familiar with them. Taking pride in our cultural ignorance. The Swedish prog movement also began at that time, which is, by the way, is not to be confused with English prog, which was an abbreviation progressive rock, slightly different. And the Swedish prog, PROGG, had a distinctive sort of arty, challenging sound and a left-wing political bent as well that saw it become protest music against things like nuclear arms, war, and even commercial things like Eurovision. It became quite oppositional, adversarial. 1974 was a huge year for Swedish music. The band Blue Swede reached number 1 in the US Billboard 100 with their cover of Hooked on a Feeling, which I'm sure we all know. And
is that in Pulp Fiction or Reservoir Dogs or something?
I don't know, but it's not in Guardians of the Galaxy.
I think Guardians of the Galaxy, I know that, yeah.
Hooked on a feeling, I'm high on believing that you're in love with me.
A big ironic kind of song now that's coming back as well, a bit like ELO. It's kind of up there with them, isn't it? That same day that got to number 1, ABBA won the Eurovision Song Contest in Brighton with Waterloo as well, which reached number 6 in the Billboard 100. So it was a really big moment in that musical culture. Over the next few years, ABBA had 9 UK number 1s, 18 top 10s. They had a number 1 Billboard hit with Dancing Queen, and alongside Led Zeppelin were the only band to have 8 consecutive number 1 albums. They effectively cemented the template for pure pop, and it was a new era for Swedish music that hastened in. An interesting bit of trivia to do with Swedish music, by the way. Swedish tax law allowed bands to claim outfits as tax deductible as long as they were obviously not something that could be worn in everyday life, and were thus necessary to the performance, to the music. So Swedish bands began to sport increasingly outrageous and expensive costumes because they were tax deductible, and that actually created a bit of a visual trend in the market. ABBA split in 1982, and we all know that was the end of music, right? But in 1986, the band Europe, also Swedish, had a number 1 hit in 25 countries with the final countdown. Yep. No, perfect. The single sold 8 million copies, and that's long before streaming was a thing, and the album sold 7 million units. That same year, Marie Fredriksson and Per Gessle, I think it's pronounced, formed Roxette. They had 4 number 1s: Listen to Your Heart, Must Have Been Love, The Look, Joyride. Absolute fucking belter of the band Roxette. They've sold 45 million albums. In 1995, they were also the first Western band allowed to play China since Wham in 85. And then 1988 saw the arrival of Nina Cherry, who I didn't know was Swedish till we started doing this, and I guess that means Eagle Eye Cherry is Swedish as well. And all of that led to what is known as the Chiron phenomenon in the 1990s. This is all playing into a culture where, okay, there's a lot of music, but gradually that music doesn't just become an incidental thing, it becomes an industry in the country. And Chiron was a big, big turning point in that, okay? Chiron actually closed in 2000, which is 2 years after its co-founder, Dennis Pop, died of cancer. He was only 35 when he died as well. In that decade, though, that studio and Dennis, along with songwriting partner Max Martin that we mentioned earlier on, launched the careers of Ace of Base and then many other bands besides, including Robin, Dr. Alban with that song It's My Life.
It's my life. It's my life.
It's my life, my world.
It's my life.
It's my life, my problem.
It's my life.
It's my life, my world.
And Rednecks, Cotton Eye Joe.
Yeah, it's pure like primary 7 school disco stuff for me.
Absolutely, yeah.
Traditional song, that, isn't it? It actually is.
I think so, yeah.
Fantastic.
Not that version, obviously.
Max Martin also quickly started working on hits for Backstreet Boys, Gary Barlow, Bryan Adams, Bon Jovi, Boyzone, Britney Spears, and that's me only going through the letter B. This
All
guy
the
has
Bs.
a lot of fucking songs. Like,
Yeah, he has. I think he's got more credits, more producer credits to his name in British chart history than George Martin, who it was before, because he'd done so many Beatles singles.
well, apparently only John Lennon and Paul McCartney have written more number ones than Max Martin. Yep.
Marathon, like I said, Marathon's a huge deal, man. Still is.
That track, Baby One More Time, Britney Spears track, was written by Max and Dennis Pop while Dennis was terminally ill in hospital, and Max would go back and forward with the ideas for the song, and Dennis would then modify them from his hospital bed. It was originally meant for TLC.
Yeah,
he
I
passed
didn't
on
know that, but interesting.
Now, quite aside to that whole Chiron thing that led to most of the big acts now, the Katy Perrys and the Taylor Swifts and stuff, are still getting songs from Max Martin and his ilk. Another breakout act from Sweden that decade was the Cardigans.
I don't know what you're looking for. You haven't found it, baby, that's for sure. You rip me up, you spread me all around. In the dust.
Yeah.
Although they had no connection to Chiron, they were a huge indie band, and they were massive in Sweden, but they were massive here as well.
We spoke about them on your
We did,
Sound as a
indeed.
Pound.
Yep.
Was that album that we did, Gran Turismo, was that not recorded at Polar Studios?
I think it was, yeah. I would also mention the band The Wannadies. Remember them? You and Me song.
It was
and
in Romeo and Juliet.
Romeo and Juliet as well, yeah.
So it's you and me always and forever. You and me always and forever.
And also the band Whale, who had a massive hit with Hobo Humping Slobo Big when I was a kid.
Don't remember
Yeah,
that, but I bet sing it.
She's a hobo humping slobo babe, get up.
Yes,
Yeah.
I do remember that. Oh my god.
That, by the way, that
No
was
idea.
Yes, I do
I'm going
remember.
to take that as a compliment.
Get up. Yeah, I do. Oh, jinx, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
so that was Whale.
That was a pure blast for the past.
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, I will say it's worth noting, and I wasn't sure, but Whigfield's Italian and Aqua were Danish, Norwegian. So,
Glad we cleared that
yeah,
up.
clearing that up. We should also not forget the single most important musician and pop star to emerge from Sweden, Crazy Frog.
What's going on?
Oh, no.
Oh yeah.
Swedish export.
Can we go back to talking about ABBA, please?
Into the 2000s, more producers kept coming out of Sweden, such as Red One, who wrote for Lady Gaga, wrote for Lady Gaga, Akon, Michael Jackson, Nicki Minaj, Pitbull, and obviously Rod Stewart, who, by the way, was pulling pints the other day
We're in the corner.
after the Celtic game down the road.
Was he really?
Yeah, he
He was,
just
aye.
took himself behind the bar and did a shift. Aye.
Some boy.
Mad bastard. Robin also reappeared in 2007 with a cool new sound, and then bands like Royksop, Eric Prides, and that's that
Royksop.
Calling Me
Aye.
song,
Mhm.
Bass Hunter.
Now you're gone. I realize my love for you was strong, and I miss you here. Now you're gone. I keep waiting here by the phone.
They
Oh,
started,
I love that Bass Hunter
they
song.
started to appear. The 2010, that brought us Swedish House Mafia and Avicii. It
Oh,
also
aye.
brought us a bit more Robin.
I'm giving it more, but I'm not the guy you're taking home. Ooh, I keep dancing on my own.
And it's whole Sweden also did really well with the kind of cooler end of the pop spectrum. We've done stuff on The Knife in the early 2000s.
Oh, yeah.
Somebody called Likey Lie is quite
Yeah,
big,
yeah.
I'm
Mhm,
told.
I follow you, don't come running. I follow you, I follow you, deep sea baby. I follow you.
Jose Gonzalez did well briefly. First Aid Kit, I didn't realise they were Swedish, they're doing pretty well. The Hives obviously had their moment. And Sweden also, of course, has a long history of breakthrough punk and metal with crossover success, and a strong catalogue of extreme metal, the tradition of garagey punk and hardcore acts. You've got Millencolin, Helicopters, Refused, Backyard Babies, Dysphere, No Fun At All.
Can you appreciate the life we left behind? Or was it just a waste of time? I could abbreviate my life down to a line.
Labels like Burning Heart, who had Parkway Drive, Boy Sets Fire, Turbo Negro. You had Bad Taste Records. They all made a name for themselves on varying degrees of the punk scene and the pop punk scene. And then you've got some of the really heavy stuff that they've pretty much almost got cornered, like Meshuggah. Marduk, Opeth, Nosm, Catatonia, The Haunted, Entombed, Dissection, Dark Funeral, Cult of Luna, Bathory, At the Gates, Amon Amarth. So many fucking
Oh my
bands.
God.
I don't say household names. I don't think Amon Amarth
No.
are a household name, but if you're into metal there,
Oh, I used to manage the metal section in Virgin Megastore, and you've just said a lot of names there that I recognise.
Swedish death metal.
it's
Bathory.
crazy how much fucking music came out of Sweden.
Yeah.
So Ace of Base were clearly immersed in a culture of music and had plenty of resources at their disposal, plenty of support and a network and loads of studios and probably loads of encouragement. Okay, Jonas and Ulf as the main songwriters had an existing love of electronic music. However, Ace of Base is more than an electronic band. It's an overt pop project, especially, considering one of the members was transitioning from punk rock, Nazi punk background. So there's an element of intent there, and arguably I'd say an element of financial ambition. You don't just stumble into that as an idle hobby. Pop, especially slick commercial pop, is actually quite a difficult thing to realise. You can't just bang it out in a garage, although I suppose with some of the household systems now, you probably can, but Ace of Base were also at the leading edge of a new generation of pop in Sweden. Forming a band like that was not a guaranteed route to stardom, and credibility was an issue for the band from the beginning, even before Ulf's past reared its head. I think the question was whether the band was born of a sincere love of pop, or was it an attempt to become somewhat famous? And if the latter, especially as far as the more conspiratorial theories are concerned, going back to what we talked about at the start of the show, were his beliefs incidental to that success, or was the platforming of them, as say Cracked magazine might suggest, a major motivating factor for the undertaking of the band? Now, that's quite paranoid thinking, that they decided to start a band to sort of Trojan horse these ideas into people's houses, but that idea is pretty well represented out there, you know. And back to the history of the band. So having decided on this musical approach, they needed a name. And this is significant, right? The name's Ace of Base. What the fuck is Ace of Base? And why, for example, is bass spelt B-A-S-E and not B-A-S-S when it's a kind of clubby pop band, you know? Wikipedia gives a quote from Ulf saying that Ace of Base's name is extrapolated from the Motorhead song Ace of Spades, and it's stuck due to the idea of 4 aces. There was 4 aces in the band. And I think he also said this in an interview with a thing called Euromen Travel magazine. The magazine asked him, some people say the name Ace of Base stems from your first practice room in a basement, the 4 of you with the 4 aces in the basement, bass, hence Ace of Base. Is that a true story? And Ulf replies, no, totally wrong. Laughs. Ha 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 ha. We simply made that story up. TV, radio and magazines were constantly asking us about our names, so we needed a story to tell. The true story is this one. One day I woke up badly hungover in front of this huge TV. It played music videos and Motorhead's Ace of Spades was on. This would make for a cool band name, I thought, and shortly thereafter Ace of Base was born. Alright. In his 2015 article, things get really spicy when the Cracked writer Adam Todd Brown theorised that Ace of Base's name really derived from a World War II submarine base. Okay, and this is interesting, okay, because that version goes, quote, the name is most likely a reference to the Kerman submarine base, a massive U-boat launching and docking facility constructed by the Nazis in the French town of Lorient. It's considered one of the most important and ambitious projects of the entire war for their side. In 1941, the missions that embarked from this facility alone were responsible for taking out more than 500 Allied ships. Because of the high success rate of the submarine missions, Kerman was nicknamed the Base of Aces.
Bullshit.
Reaching.
So his take goes on, as far as Nazi references go, it's kind of obscure, but if some piece of shit Nazi started a pop band with the intent of spreading Nazi propaganda subliminally to the masses and thought he was so much smarter than everyone else that he could slip a Nazi reference right into his band's name without anyone noticing, we'll leave that thought hanging. My take on that's tenuous, but it's not impossible.
No.
It's tenuous, but it's not impossible. There is that sort of nudge, nudge, wink, wink thing of like, that's quite clever. It's coded, you know, it's cool. We've all slipped wee hidden jokes into track names and stuff in the past. So I do think it's reaching a wee bit.
When I read that article and it was going on about the bass and everything, I was like, this is such a reach. And then, but when it got to the bit that was like, it was called Base of Aces, I was like, that is a weird coincidence.
And it's also bass, B-A-S.
It seems really unlikely to me that it would be an obscure Nazi reference. I mean, I can't imagine someone that, just taking him on his word here, who claimed he was just part of a ragtag group of Nazis when he was a wee guy, is going to be so steeped in Nazi history that he's going to learn about this fucking obscure base in the south of France.
Sure, but I'm being devil's advocate here. In isolation, you're right, yes, that's a bit random. However, bearing in mind that 10 years before that, in fact more than 10 years before this, there were photos of him wearing custom made SS shirts, clearly had a lot of neo-Nazi paraphernalia, and you know.
So you think he could have been playing down how much he knew about it, but actually he could have been quite interested in it and known things, obscure facts like that.
I mean, like, I'm being devil's advocate here. I'm not trying to show my hand on what I think is credible or not. If that was the only thing, that would be an absurd assumption. But is there a pattern? Let's investigate.
I mean, you could argue that about Slayer as well. Is there a pattern in their music? But exactly, we did, and you know the conclusion we came to.
And we concluded that was nonsense. Probably. So the band lineup, the prehistory, the musical origins. Jonas and his sister started as Tech Noir, which by the way is the nightclub from Terminator. I'm sure you immediately realised that. You got me burning.
Listen, I've never seen Terminator, so
that is fucking ridiculous.
I think I've seen Terminator 2 a couple of times. I've never seen the first one.
The first one's great.
How?
I saw the second one because it was out when I was a wee lassie, and I liked Edward Furlong, but I've never seen the
That's
first
also
one.
ridiculous. Nobody likes Eddie Furlong.
He's, oh, guy's a mess. It's a sin.
Anyway, so when they started as a band called Tech Noir, playing kind of typical 90s electronic pop. Jonas says he was a huge New Romantic fan. Ulf is a colourful character. Acerdom.de, the website, goes deep on him, including the recurring rumour that I did see this in a few different publications, that at the age of 4 his behaviour became destructive. For instance, he and his buddies burned down a playground.
At 4?
At 4 brackets, and some say the school as well. I heard he did 9/11 as well. I mean, just
4-year-olds burning down playgrounds.
Yeah, just pile it all on top. Yeah. I mean, that honestly, that fucking appeared a
That
few
can't
places.
be true.
It continues. In 1982, Ulf started in a new school. It was during this period that he started drinking and doing drugs. He also joined the skinhead gang BSS, which translates into Keep Sweden Swedish. When the gang broke off into two factions, he was drawn into the more radical of the two, which sided with the Aryan resistance. Ulf realised that his lifestyle was no good when the violence hit too close to home. Apparently 2 of his closest friends were killed. I didn't find anything that verified that. That's acerdom.de claiming that. In terms of his music, when asked what got him into music, Ulf replied, one word, Kraftwerk.
I'm the operator with my pocket calculator.
And he specifically described Computer World, the album Computer World, as proving you could combine pop and technology to great success. He also said, I met Jonas in the mid-1980s. Both of us were heavy Depeche Mode fans at the time, so the first project we started together was Tech Noir, where we mainly played faster electronic music. Okay, first of all, he says heavy Depeche Mode fans, which is the most Glaswegian phrase I've
I know.
heard.
Heavy Depeche. And they were, because
Depeche Mode fans?
the start of the video for the sign is the 4 of them like turning round in the darkness before it starts, and that's like the start of that Depeche Mode video.
Interestingly though, he says he played in Tech Noir. Okay, now I understood originally that Tech Noir was just Jonas and his 2 sisters. Ulf claims that he was in Tech Noir. Now that's interesting for the chronology of it, okay? The 2013 Vice article puts forth its own version of their band's origins. They say, here's how Ekberg found his way into Ace of Base. In August of 1990, a Gothenburg musician named Jonas Berggren was hours from playing a show with his band, who'd been performing for several years as either CAD, Tech Noir or Kalinin Prospect. At the last minute, their bass player decided to ditch the show to go watch the Rolling Stones on the other side of town. So that's, by the way, that's such a fucking high school band experience, man. So Berggren asked his friend Ekberg to fill in. A few weeks later, they dubbed their new lineup Ace of Base. It's unclear whether or not Berggren or the rest of Ace of Base knew about Ekberg's previous dalliances with neo-Nazism when they asked him to join. But we actually know that that's not accurate. Ulf was in a band called Commit Suicide for around 3 years in his teens, and they were an overtly neo-Nazi band. Before Ace of Base formed, Jonas was socialising and writing songs with Ulf, and Ulf's already said that he was actually in Tech Noir. You know, if Vice had actually read a 1993 interview with Bravo magazine in Germany, I think Bravo magazine was affiliated with that TV station that there used to be as well, they would know that the band members elaborated upon that chronology of events. In the interview, Bravo asked them, how much do you actually know about Ulf's past as a skinhead and member of the Nazi group? And Jenny replied, I'm about to reveal a secret we've still not revealed to anyone. We knew everything from the beginning. Ulf wanted to be in the band and we told him, we want you to be part of the band, but our condition is you have to break with your past. He promised us that, and that was enough for us. We knew this bomb would explode, and we knew we'd take it if we supported each other. So it's interesting to just finally dispel any notion that there was ambiguity about the rest of the band knowing what Ulf Ekberg was into. They knew. In the 1997 documentary I mentioned earlier, The Story, that details how Jonas and Ulf were friends from school before the latter's leanings towards the skinhead gangs.
Yeah. Right?
Tech Noir and Commit Suicide apparently shared a rehearsal room,
They
and,
knew.
and Ulf did work on music at the time with Jonas. So to be clear, Tech Noir shared a practice space with a band that sang fascist songs. Yeah. There was an explicit awareness of Ulf's gang activities, music and attitudes. So there is definitely a level of accommodation and tolerance for pretty horrendous beliefs and stances there, albeit we have to remember we're talking about teenagers.
Exactly.
Yeah. as Ulf began to move away from the gangs, with encouragement from his parents apparently, he began to work more in music with the three siblings, and Jenny describes his style of dress changing at that time and him getting to be more like his old self and, quote, less of a juvenile delinquent. I think it's important to remember we're talking about kids here, but it is also important to acknowledge that they knew this guy was a neo-Nazi, that he was hanging around with skinheads, that he was saluting pictures of Hitler and wore SS t-shirts and Iron Eagles and things like that.
I'm just playing devil's advocate, but like, see, when if it's people you grow up with and they're your friends through school or whatever, and then one of them gets in with a bad crowd, I think that there's, especially when you're a teenager, there is a kind of level of going, oh, what is he doing hanging about with him, like getting in with that crowd or whatever, but maybe even you'd still talk to them, or you're still friends with them out with that, and forgiveness is probably easier when you're younger as well. And I don't know, I just think I don't see that as such a big deal really, that he took up with our bad crowd when he was younger, but still had pals that weren't involved in that, and they were like, right, you've put that behind you now, like come and hang about with us. It's just, there's nothing really, I don't think, oh, they should have totally called him out, or they shouldn't have gone in a band with him. They like you say, they were teenagers and they grew up together.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it would happen now, but I don't think we should view it through the lens of now.
But teenagers now are more about escalating conflict than diffusing it.
That's true. That innocent tolerance, that innocent accommodation, seeing past the differences is definitely a thing of the past.
In this country, I'm sure it's probably culturally different for how teenagers, in some respects, act in Scandinavia.
I don't know, man. I don't know if it'd be that different from Scandinavia. I think it's maybe just changing attitudes more than borders.
If you know that somebody's just kind of impressionable as well, and they've just fallen in with a bad crowd, I don't know.
It was years though. It was years that he was into this stuff. The Bravo interview actually further probes the rest of the band's take on the matter. Bravo asks them, have you ever felt anger over Ulf's past? Jonas replies, thank God, but it seems like people are completely done with it. Hey, well, I got news for you. It's 2022 and we're doing a show about it.
We're still talking about it.
That was 1993, sorry to let you down. People were very kind to us wherever we gave concerts, especially in Israel, because we were afraid that there might be problems there.
Oh, I read an account on a blog just randomly about a lassie who the DJ started playing the sign or something like that, or a bat mitzvah. She was like, stop.
Also, somebody needs to break it to Jonas that there are definitely problems in Israel. Ulf then says, I can breathe a sigh of relief that it's all over again. Sorry, mate. I think it's good that I spoke frankly about my past and didn't keep quiet. People saw that I was really sorry for what I did. Lynn also told the Toronto Sun newspaper in 95, we have this Christian way of living to understand people and say, okay, you've got a problem here, let's take care of it, instead of turning your back on somebody. Okay, fair enough. You know, that's a fairly comprehensive journey through what they claim were the origins of it and the timeline of it and their attitudes towards it.
Yeah. And maybe when he says it's behind me, he means I've not got any more skeletons in my closet and I've said everything that I need to say, and I'm glad that I don't need to worry about anything else coming out now because it's came out and that's it.
And that's what I'm not entirely sure about, but let's dig into that.
Yeah.
So to get some more context, we should look at the scene and the band that came before Ace of Base for Ulf, and the band that spawned so much of the controversy that's dogged them for almost 3 decades now. Nazi punk, the scene around Commit Suicide. Let's talk a wee bit about Nazi punk just very briefly. As Steve Nopper pointed out in GQ, since day one, punk rockers had flirted with fascist imagery for shock value, with the Sex Pistols, Sid Vicious and Susie Sue wearing swastikas in public. However, in 1978 in Britain, the National Front initiated a punk-oriented youth organisation called the Punk Front. Although the Punk Front only actually lasted 1 year, it recruited several English punks, as well as forming a number of white power punk bands such as Dentiste, The Vents, Tragic Minds and White Boss. And in the early 1980s, the white power skinhead band Brutal Attack fully morphed into a Nazi punk band.
So wake from your bed and raise your head, Aryan child, listen to
The Rock Against Communism movement originated in the United Kingdom in late 78 with far-right activists that were directly linked to the National Front. That was intended to counter the Rock Against Racism movement, obviously really high-profile thing involving The Clash and Specials and so many others. The first Rock Against Communism concert was in Leeds, Yorkshire in 1978, featuring the Dentists and the Vents. RAC, Rock Against Communism, held one concert in 1979 and another in spring 1983, which was headlined by the band Screwdriver, who are synonymous with Nazi punk. They were a white power rock band led by a guy called Ian Stewart Donaldson. After that, RAC concerts were held more often. They were often headlined by Screwdriver and featured other white power bands such as Skullhead and No Remorse. In the mid-1980s, summer concerts were also often held at the Suffolk home of Edgar Griffin, a Conservative Party activist and father of Nick Griffin, a National Front organiser who later became the national chair of the BNP, the British National Party, who we're all familiar with over here, I think. By the late 1980s, the RAC name had given way to the White Noise Club, another National Front-based group, and later Blood and Honour, which was set up by Ian Stewart Donaldson when they fell out with the National Front leadership. As hardcore punk music became more popular in the 90s and 2000s, many white power bands took on a more hardcore influenced sound, and then the Nazi punk subculture appeared in the US by the early 1980s in the hardcore punk scene. How does that affect Nazi punk in Sweden? Inspired in many ways by the movement in the UK in the early 1980s, the neo-Nazi movement in Sweden began to encourage the formation of bands as a way of attracting new young recruits and spreading its message. The group Ultima Thule, however you want to say it, formed in 1984, and they kind of grew to epitomise the mobilising potential of far-right aligned groups. And to be clear here as well, Ultima Thule outwardly reject Nazi and fascist labels, and at least once on record have publicly stopped a concert because they saw people seek Island in the audience. However, and it's a big fucking however, their first vocalist and frontman Bruno Hansen was a prominent member of the fascist Nordic Realm Party in the early 1980s. They played more than 30 skinhead events alongside groups like Agent Bulldog, Vit Aggression and Dulvanger. They appeared in compilation albums alongside Screwdriver and Brutal Assault. They set up a store and record club which sold and released albums by openly neo-Nazi groups like Svastika and Ragnarok Records. Ultima Thule's story, it kind of revolved around the district of Nyköping in Sweden, and in the nearby district of Norrköping in the early 1990s a fanzine called Dead or Alive sprang up. That actually soon moved online and in 1993 rebranded to Flashback. This becomes a big factor. Zine culture is obviously a big thing in the right, especially free speech absolutists. Flashback was going to become a highly controversial platform. It claimed to prioritise freedom of speech and was, I think, safe to say, a foreshadowing of the direction the internet would take for a lot of people, bolstering the far right in the process. In 98, in response to Ulf Ekberg's earlier comments distancing himself from his neo-Nazi youth, some of the euphemisms we mentioned earlier on where he said he was around neo-Nazis, he was in company of neo-Nazis, found himself, yeah, he distanced himself in that way, and also distanced himself from links to the Sweden Democrats, a kind of right to far right party in Sweden. Flashback released a CD titled Uffe Was a Nazi as a response to that, vividly illustrating his history within the neo-Nazi punk movement as part of Commit Suicide. That established, it's probably worth taking a look at the band Commit Suicide in a bit more detail, as they're interesting in ways beyond just Ulf's membership in them. Commit Suicide's members, Ulf Ekberg, obviously, Anders Klarström, Jens Svensson and Jens Larsson. They were active between 83 and 86 and had a small fan base in Gothenburg. They held a few performances there, and the largest was a big outdoor one on, I think it's called the City Avenue, Gothenburg Avenue, I think it's how that translates. Anders Klarström is very important. He went on to be the founding member of the Sweden Democrats. In the beginning, that party did not actually have a formal leader, but Klarström held that position from late in, I think, 1988, and eventually became the first real party leader. He participated in writing the first party platform in 89 and wrote most of their 1993 programme ahead of the general election that year. We will come back to that a wee bit. Prior to the Sweden Democrats, he was also an attendee at meetings of the Nordic Reich movement. I will say, of the other two members, Jens Svensson and Jens Larsson, I couldn't find a lot. There's a contemporary Swedish composer named Jens Larsson. I don't know if it's the same guy, although a lot of search results seem to have been removed for that guy, so it's hard to establish if it is him. It may well not be, it may just be a coincidence, but it could be. So, despite, or indeed perhaps because of, those early denunciations, and I think likely provoked in no small way by that 1997 Swedish TV documentary I've spoken about, where he attempted to admit and also play down the earlier beliefs and credentials, that issue refused to go away, and in 1998 it got a huge injection of publicity. Lost Media Wiki states, during a TV interview in March 93, Ulf had supposedly adamantly denied ever having anything to do with Commit Suicide, the Sweden Democrats, or Nazism as a whole. As a response to this, Swedish record label Flashback Records began searching their archives for recordings of Commit Suicide, with the fruits of their labour being put up for purchase on the website in 98, a 5-track compilation CD of recordings from the band entitled Uffe Was a Nazi.
5 years after he said that.
However, Flashback Records stated publicly, the purpose of the album is not to question a person's political convictions. The purpose is instead to prove that Ulf Ekberg's background is different from the one he gave to 60 million American TV viewers in March 93, where he, among other things, denied that he had ever been a Nazi. The album is released due to Ekberg's cowardice. The material is therefore in some places very rough, and sensible people are warned. That's effectively a trigger warning, isn't it? From a free speech absolutist outfit releasing Nazi records, they've put out a trigger warning. That's very nice of them. Yeah, you're right, it was 5 years later. However, in 97, in that documentary, he'd also again softly distanced himself from directly being responsible for a lot of those beliefs. That may have kind of antagonised him a wee bit.
So he never really took ownership of it till after that came out then?
Well, the later comments, the 2013 comments especially were the ones where he took full ownership of it. I think the nauseating thing, that was in 2013. Even though it was 1,000 copies, the release of that wee record made international news. It was played on Israeli radio, German TV, Norway, Finland, Denmark, USA. Ace of Base already had to hire bodyguards for their tours following 1993 due to anti-Nazi protesters targeting the band. The track names on it are blatant and shocking. I don't know Swedish, so Rör inte vårt land translates to don't touch your country.
Sen går de ut på gatorna och superknackar och slåss. Rör inte vårat land, nej, nej, nej. Rör inte vårat land, nej, nej, nej.
Vitmagt Schwarzskalleslakt translates to white power, black skull slaughter. There is also a cover of Screwdriver Smash the IRA, which is modified to be Smash the VPK.
They call me Nazi, 'cause I love my country. Now what in hell is so wrong? Smash the VPK, smash. Corrupt politicians and sniveling left-wing scum. I can tend to let them get away. Come on, who's there? Smash the IRA, smash the IRA.
The VPK, or the Left Party, is a socialist and feminist party in Sweden. The record also contained a booklet with pictures of Ekberg from that time, including 3 pictures where he's making a Hitler salute, 1 picture where he's wearing a KKK shirt, and another one where he's wearing a swastika shirt.
He sounds like he was a wee dick.
The pictures of the Hitler salute had actually first surfaced in Express in that newspaper in 97. Ulf responded to that release, I did have a synth band called Commit Suicide between 84 and 86 with 2 gentlemen called Jens Andersson and Jens Svensson. He doesn't mention Anders Klarström in that comment.
Yeah, because people would recognise that name
And
from
Anders Klarström founded
political
the
party.
far-right party. So that's interesting, right?
So he is trying to obfuscate.
A wee bit, yeah. And we were talking about he doesn't have any more skeletons in his closet.
Really?
Peeking it. He goes on, and 2 of the songs in this demo were written and performed by us. The problem is that the other 4 songs were skinhead music with very racist lyrics. These songs have absolutely nothing to do with Commit Suicide. We did not write or perform those songs that were attributed to us. Commit Suicide was a new wave music band creating and performing electronic music on synthesizers without any political touch or agenda. The racist songs on this demo were not by us, but our potential association with such groups is a matter I truly regret. So, that's odd.
So he's saying that it wasn't, that those recordings aren't them, so who are they?
4 of the tracks, as I understand it, were re-recorded, and they were meant to be re-recordings of their songs,
Of the original ones.
including the one that was Smash the VPK, that was adapted from Smash the IRA. Now, technically, yeah, he didn't write Smash the IRA, that's a Screwdriver song,
Yeah.
but as I understand it, the rewrite of Smash the VPK was a Commit Suicide rewrite. I think that angle's a little confused. He openly admits to being a neo-Nazi, he openly admits to the photos of the sea cows, the swastika logos and all, but then refutes having ever written Nazi lyrics or songs.
Maybe he didn't.
Maybe he didn't, just sang them.
Yeah. maybe he only did do those 2 songs, and the people at Flashback have got their own agenda.
Oh, could be that.
Yeah,
You know?
well, who are Flashback? Flashback Media Group is a controversial Swedish media group run by Jan Axelsson. It's a large forum community in Swedish and in English where everyone is allowed total freedom of speech. That always ends well. The forum has been investigated by the Swedish police on numerous occasions and is under constant surveillance due to its members' abundant discussions about drug use, child porn, race science, bestiality, and you fucking name it, it's on there. Flashback originates from that Dead or Alive fanzine that I spoke about, published by, the then 14-year-old Jan Axelsson in Norrköping. That developed into multiple projects focusing on different aspects of subculture, mainly punk, and changed its name in 93, like I said. The website published in 95, the proclaimed goal was still to maintain freedom of speech and express underground political opinions. He said, Jan, said that the magazine and website are opinion neutral and have no religious or political affiliations, but are uncensored. The website has on multiple occasions been shut down by the authorities and fined hundreds of thousands of krona. After a trial in 2002, it became illegal for Flashback to run a discussion forum in Sweden unless all the posts were moderated. I think because of hate speech and obscenity laws. After 2003, the forum management was moved to a British company. The servers remain hosted in Sweden, however, and it's still regularly reported to the Swedish police for insult, slander, etc. Flashback Records, that put out the record, is the label of Flashback Media Group, and so far Flashback Records has released only one title, which is...
Ufa was a Nazi.
Yep, you guessed it. The website and the press release for that CD are interesting. They read... The album Ufa Was a Nazi contains Ulf Ekberg's past as an acclaimed, brackets, Nazi idol. Flashback has looked up all the old recordings from this time and published them in a special edition of 1,000 numbered copies. The disc includes recordings with several groups and styles of music. Here, pure rock is mixed with synth and ska. There is even a cover of the white power group Screwdriver's Smash the IRA, which with Ulf Ekberg is called Smash the VPK. The album also contains a booklet in colour with lots of old pictures of Ulf Ekberg from this time. In these pictures, Ekberg greets Hitler. In one picture he wears a Ku Klux Klan t-shirt, and in another a t-shirt with a large swastika. Here is also documentation from his time in the Sweden Democrats. Signatures from early meetings where Ulf Ekberg was secretary, and a picture of Ekberg posing together with the old core of the party. Now that I think is really interesting. If you cast your mind way back to his quotes earlier on, he maintained he had not in 25 no political activism. He was pretty specific about the timeline for that, saying it was 25 years. But this Flashback Records are saying that in the original copy of that CD, which I don't have obviously, I say obviously, you're like, if anybody's going to have it, it's probably going to be me, right? But they're saying they've got signatures of him serving as the secretary of the party, and he did omit Klarström from that band lineup in his apology. So that last part about Sweden Democrats is particularly interesting, I think, given that those ongoing denials. He's personally stated to E! Online again, I want to point out that I've never been a member of Sweden Democrats. That is a factual error. So that's just a full, word against word. Flashback are saying it's there. You can have it. It's in the sleeve notes, which I've not seen, but they are saying it's in the sleeve notes.
The motivation of Flashback, they're saying it's they're exposing him because he's a hypocrite or he's lying
he's
or whatever, right?
And he's not taking full ownership. He's downplaying it.
Good marketing as well, though, right? Because he's a hugely famous Swede.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
So, by the way, we could
That's-
probably like he's got some dodgy past.
Mhm.
What if we capitalise on that?
Absolutely. I think they're
Mhm.
definitely piggybacking on it,
Mhm.
and I'm sure that those 1,000 copies are heavily snapped up. I know that they're collector's items.
Why only 1,000 as well? Like you could
You probably sell a lot more now.
sell way more than that. Yeah.
And with the flashback are also saying that they don't have a political affiliation, they just platform other people. Is that like, or do they have an axe to grind with? Like, or are they part of the same scene? Like, do you know what I'm trying to...
They just seem to claim that they're just outraged that he's cowardice. They use the word
Aye.
cowardice.
Mhm.
It seems like the record label only has one political agenda.
Well, there you go. So, I mean, but certainly Ulf was in a band with the founder of the Sweden Democrats.
Yeah.
There's a lot of wiggle room, I think, in his use of the word a member. I was never a member, although I also think it's funny that it said wiggle and member in the same sentence.
Your vaguely penis.
Was he simply a supporter or affiliate? I find it highly probable that he was probably one, if not both, at least for some time.
Uh-huh.
However, so were a lot of Swedes, because whilst it's unpalatable to us kind of sophisticated soy drinking West Enders, it isn't illegal to
No.
be in or vote for the Sweden Democrats. They are a party. So who are the Sweden Democrats, and what was the extent and the status of the far right in Sweden?
Mhm.
That is a thrilling question.
Yep.
We're going to answer next episode.
I cannot wait
That's
to
it.
find out.
We're going to come straight out the traps on a music podcast discussing the history of the far right in Sweden. Get your fucking heads around that, folks.
Yeah, so tune in for that next week. And also, just there's something we didn't ask you to do earlier on, but you really should do is, if you really like Nazis, or you really like Ace of Base, share this episode. Just tweet it or share the story on your Instagram or Facebook or whatever. Just,
We're this is going to become the defining analysis of this key issue in the history of mankind. Are Ace of Base neo-Nazis?
Mhm.
This is going to be the definitive one. Okay, so share it. Show off. Be the first one.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.